Alright, Section 7. Camshaft gear train auxiliary drive gear camshaft assembly. Camshaft gear train description maintenance, camshaft drive gears removal, inspection, installation. Spring drive gear disassembly, inspection, assembly, installation. Drive idler gear bearing clearance check, removal, inspection, installation. Your idle gear stab shaft removal, inspection, bearing sleeve replacement, installation. Crankshaft gear removal, inspection, installation. Camshaft gear train assembly, auxiliary drive gear description, maintenance. Camshaft description, removal, inspection, assembly, installation. Counterweight application. Exhaust valve timing, locating top dead center, checking valve timing, time valve, specify service data specification, equipment list. All right, engine maintenance manual for the 645, section 7, camshaft gear train, auxiliary drive gear, camshaft assemblies. Your camshaft gear train description: power necessary to drive the camshaft with the turbocharger become freewheeling is supplied with the gear train in the rear of the engine. Shows the gear train before the camshaft drive housing and turbocharger installed. Figure 7.2 show the cross section of the gear train with the gear train. Figure 7.1 consists of the crankshaft gear with the knob of the crankshaft number 1 idler gear. Show the camshaft drive gear, spring assembly, idle gear, turbo guard, charger driver, spring drive gear, camshaft gear. Maintenance. Upon completing the engine disassembly is beginning the undertaking of the unlike of the engine gear train would be removed with the engine with a one time. The exemption with the number 2 idler gear with the turbocharged driver gear, which are part of the spring drive gear as assemblies, each of the gear of the train can be removed independently. When any of the gears are removed with the gear train, they are inspected for the excessive backlash upon reassembling and inserting the fuel gauge and tire of the gear face. Excessive backlash can be improper valve operation, injection period backlash clearances are given on the service data page of the end of the section. Clearance between the gear, subshaft bearings, and thrust clearance must also be maintained with a specified limit. To refer to number 1 idler gear for bearing clearance check without disassembly. Turbocharger after ducts, cooler ducts, auxiliary drive assembly with a coupling disc must be removed for the engine. Facilitate access for the drive camshaft gear train. Removal of the number 1 idle gear, the crankshaft gear with the required for the crankshaft gears, the oil retainer camshaft drive gear must be removed. Engine timing will not be disturbed during the other gear removal as long as the camshaft, the crankshafts are not moved when gears are removed. Of the original idler gears are to be replied if the desired remaining timing mark orientation for the future work mark the gears as they lie before removal. It shows your camshaft gear train, the camshaft shaft brake, a thumb bear, thrust bearing, turbocharged drive gear, spring idler, a number 2 idler gear, stub shaft assembly, stub shaft bearing, number 1 idler gear, crankshaft gear. Then over here it shows your clearance measurement with a shim if necessary with the oil slinger and oil seat retainer assembly. The following paragraphs contain the removal of the inspection installation procedure for each of the gear in the train. With the camshaft drive gear, with the removal of the lock wire with the 4 bolts of the holding with the counterweight with the camshaft drive gear with the subshaft. The remove of the dowel bolts of the retainer plate with the counterweight with the camshaft drive gear can be removed from the subshaft. Remove the dowels with the counterweight with the camshaft drive gear. Drive them out from the backside of the gear. Inspection. Inspect the gear teeth for the fatigue indication cracks or other evidence failure of the possible the magnaflux inspection should be performed. In addition with the above, also check with the camshaft gear with the basic auxiliary drive gear with aware of the step. Normal discolorization due to narrow gear mating with the wide gear should be done considered as aware of the step. An accurate measurement can be made by using a 420 thousandths to 430 thousandths of an inch diameter roller. Place a roller on an unworn portion of the gear tooth was suspended over the worn portion. The distance between the roller and the worn gear tooth should not exceed the limit given in the service of the data. The wear steps exceed the wear limit of the camshaft gear with auxiliary drive gear should be replaced. And pitting of the gouging with the cam gear with the auxiliary drive gear mates indicate that the misalignment of the cause should be determined before applying the replacement gears. Installation: install the camshaft drive gear and the subshaft. They ensure the position of the subshaft with the position of the mark line with the upper markings of the mating surface. The mating parts are shown in figure 721. Install counterweight with the subshaft. With the counterweight with the subshafts marks the line. Install dowel retainer plate with a counterweight with the subshaft bolts with the torque bolts of the 90 foot-pounds of torque. Install with the dowel bolts with the torque to 17 foot-pounds of torque. Lock wire mounting bolts with the dowel bolts in groups of 3, 2 mounting bolts and 1 dowel bolt. If any of the gear with the camshaft gear train are replaced with the relationship with the crankshaft with the camshaft that has been disturbed, refer to the exhaust valve timing at the end of the section with the information position and marking of the gears. Your spring drive gear assembly, figure 7-3 consists of the number 2 idler gear with a turbocharged drive gear for the spring assembly mounted with between the two gear for the absorb the torsional vibration which might be transmitted with each of the gear assembly with the turbocharger with the spring drive gear assembly should be removed and assembly within the disassembled with the inspection. Figure 7-3 shows the spring drive gear assembly and for disassembly. Remove the spring drive gear with assembly from the subshaft with a check with the also with the low loose gear to spider bolt the discard any loose bolts and the necessary with the cover the loose bolt may be covered the movement of the spider due to high loads of which will damage the threads. Damaged bolts will result in the unsatisfactory clamp load. Move the lock wire 8 over the 1.5 13 bolts holding the turbocharged drive gear into the outer spider. Move the snap ring near the inner circumference of the gear with the turbocharged drive gear can be separated from the assembly. Next, remove the spring assembly for the idler. Remove gear with removing the 5/8 inch 11 threaded bolts with the 1/2 dowels of the 8th gear and 1/2 dowels from the idle gear. It should not be necessary further disassemble the spring drive gear. Some of the spiders and springs the spring making of the spring of the assembly do not require any of the routine type of the maintenance of the spring drive gear assembly is found to be defective. It should be replaced with a qualified assembly. Warning, any type of disassembly of the spring assembly with the use of the vise or clamps, rams, or pinch bars can be extremely hazardous and is not recommended inspection. Inspect the gear teeth if the fatigue indication cracks or pits or other evidence damage. If possible, the magniflies inspection should be performed on the gears. Inspect the idle gear bearings to see if they are not gouged or damaged in any way. Also check the oil holes to see if they are not plugged. Assembly. Thoroughly clean 4th, 5/8 inch, 11 threaded idle spider mounting bolts. Remove all alteration threads. Lubricant. Use the cleaner activator so listed with the surface tab with also clean spider bolt holes. Lubricant with the contamination using the same cleaner. Slide the spring assembly with the idle gear hub, applying the sealing compound of 5/8 inch, 11 the bolts over the install of the bolts idle gear into the inner spider. The torque to 165 foot-pounds of torque. And spider idle gear spring assembly are used to install the gear 2 spider dowel holes at 1/4 inch below the surface and stake the dowel holes in and the 3 places at 120 degrees apart. If the new idle gear or spring assemblies are being used to try to drill 2 holes within the gear web into the spider, drill the 1 5/16 of an inch deep liner ream holes at 1 9/32 of an inch deep, and then plus or minus 4.4985 plus or minus 5,000 of an inch minus 0,000 of an inch. Locate the holes at 3.937 of an inch plus or minus 3,000 of an inch. Above below the idle gear center line and the line 2 gear mounting holes. Bolt holes drive 2 dowels at 1/4 inch below the surface of the stake holes with the 3 places 120 degrees apart. 120 degrees apart. Install the turbocharger drive gear on the idle gear hub. Install the snap ring with the idle gear hub groove. Apply the thread lubricant with the bolt threads with the washer with the install with the 1/2 2 by 13 1 1/4 inch bolts hardened washer and replace with 1 1/8 of an inch bolt. Use the earlier models add washers through the turbocharger drive gear into the outer spider torque bolts at 82 foot-pounds of torque lock wire to the bolt threads. Installation. Place the spring drive gear assembly on the idle gear stub shaft being used the 2 positions that are aligned with the figure 721. If a new gear is used, refer to the exhaust valve. If the new gear is used, refer to the exhaust valve timing at the end of the section. Information position with the marking of the gear. The timing procedure not required in the camshaft and the crankshaft positions have not been disturbed. Number 1, idler bearing and clearance for the checkout with the disassembly. Number 1, idle gear bearing clearance can be checked without disassembly of the engine. Move the rear left bank of the oil pan handhold. Cover the insert of the rod assembly into the camshaft and drive the housing so that the end of the flat inside of it at the bottom. Position the rods of the bracket mount and straddle for the crankcase end plate to the top of the rod contacts on the side of the number 1 idle gear. Figure 7-4. Hand tighten the lock bracket bolt. Apply with a light tension spring between the lower part of the rod and edge of the handhold opening. Figure 7-4. Maintain idle gear to rod contact. Photo. Note, photos at the right was taken without camshaft drive housing, install of the rod and assembly gear to the idle gear application. Rod assembly, idle number 1 idle gear, bracket mounting, rod assembly, spring, dial indicator support clamp. Alright, secure the support clamp on the dial indicator with the edge of the handhold opening position with the indicator plunger so that it contacts the flat inside of the rod. Figure 7-4. When the cylinder test valve is closed with the engine turning bar, manually rock the crankshaft as many times as necessary to remove the oil from the idle clearing bearing. This will be evident if the dial indicator with no increase over the pressure reading taken over each direction of the crankshaft travel. Bar the crankshaft slightly in one direction, therefore no further indicator mover set the indicator at 0. Bar the crankshaft opposite direction until there is no further dial indicator movement. Note reading multi-reading between 1.3 to obtain the number 1 idle gear bearing clearance. Refer to the limits of service data. It may be necessary to lock the left bank of the camshaft order to provide sufficient load on the number 1 idle gear to obtain the full movement. There should be done with a clearance that does not fall within the limits of given in the service data. If the idle gear is removed, refer to the following procedures. Alright, removal of the 4 bolts washers holding the thrust plate with the idle gear. Remove the thrust plate idle gear from the stub shaft. Inspection gear teeth with the fatigue and indication cracks of the pits or the other evidence of failure possible. The manual flux inspection should be performed. Installation camshaft, gear train, and assembly information for the complete installation procedure. Idle gear, stub shaft assembly. Removal of the after spring drive gear assembly of the number 1 idle gear with the attached oil line tab. Then remove the sub shaft assembly can be taken off with remove the lock wire dowel bolts and locking dowels. Remove the mounting bolts and stub shaft assembly. Inspection, check the oil passages are not locked. Not plugged. Check the alignment of oil holes in the upper subshaft sleeve with the holes on the subshaft. Inspect the sleeve with the nicks and gouges. Inspect upper subshaft seal and replace it if necessary. Check the bearing on lower subshaft sleeve and the upper subshafts to see if they are not gouged or damaged in any way. Alright, your number 1 subshaft bearing replacement. Remove the press fit bearing from the subshaft with the heating bearing until it can be removed. Install the new bearing with a heating bearing in oil to 300 to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, pressing on the subshaft. Make sure that the oil hole through the bearing is the 12 o'clock position. Number 2 subshaft sleeve replacement. Remove 3/8 inch dowels with a pin sleeve with the subshaft. Heat the sleeve until it can be removed from the subshaft. Install the new sleeve by heating the sleeve in the oil to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Press the subshaft. Oil holes in the sleeve can be aligned within 1/32 of an inch of the oil passage in the subshaft. Install the new dowel. Alright, installation. The new subshaft assembly is applied to the camshaft gear train. Assembly for installation. Proceed with the subshaft assembly that was removed from the engine is to be reused. See the following installation procedure. Attach the subshaft assembly with a crankcase with the 3 vertically centered mounting bolts with a finger tighten. Apply the lower idle gear to the subshaft assembly with a mesh with the crankshaft gear. Place a feeler gauge between the lower idler crankshaft gear teeth. Check the backlash limits for the service data. If necessary, reposition the subshaft assembly until the allowable backlash is obtained. Apply the remaining subshaft assembly mounting bolts and torque all the bolts. Install the dowel bolts, lock wire all bolts. Apply oil lines and subshaft bracket. The crankshaft gear removal. Remove the crankshaft gear from the crankshaft of the oil slinger that can be removed from the crankshaft gear with removing the oil slinger to the crankshaft gear bolts. Inspection of the gear teeth with the fatigue and identification cracks and pits. Other evidence of failure, if possible, the magnaflux inspection, and it should be performed. Inspect the oil slinger with the oil seal retainer to see that they are not bent or damaged in any way. Installation camshaft gear train assembly information complete the installation procedure. Camshaft gear train assembly. If complete with the gear train that has been disassembled, disassembled and not included with the camshaft sub brackets, the following procedures should be installed with the alignment of the various components. Your subshaft bracket application. Inspect the crankcase end plate with any of the burrs with damaged air, clean any of the debris with the holes ends of the plate with the end of the plate surface. Wipe the crankshaft gear teeth clean. Insert the coupling bolt into the gear over the backside of the installment of the proper position of the crankshaft as shown in figure 721. Secure the crankshaft gear and within 2 nuts mounted or at least tightened. If new gear is used, refer to the exhaust valve timing at the end of the section. Information on the positioning marking of the gear timing procedure are not required in the camshaft position have not been disturbed. Inspect the subshaft bracket rear of the surface of the burrs and wipe clean with making sure all oil passages are clean and free of dirt. Install the 2 temporary lock pins figure 7.5 out of the idle gear subshaft bracket mounting holes in the crankcase end plate. If this, install the subshaft bracket in position. Apply with 3 vertical centered 1/2 inch 20 mounting bolt hardened washer thread. Hardened washers. Finger tighten the mounting bolts. Apply the idler gear as figure file 7868 with the number 1 idler gear stub figure 76. Place the feeler gauge between the idler gear gauge teeth and crankshaft gear teeth to check with the gear backlash, which is specified in service data at the end of this section. Alright, and this is your temporary location pins, and then figure 75 idler stub shaft bracket application, and then check the number 1 idler gear to crankshaft gear backlash figure 76. No, the number 1 idler gear may be used as a gauge if not available. If the backlash is not within the limit specified by the gear, gently tap the subshaft bracket with a brass hammer until the position obtained with the proper backlash. Do not tap on the machine surface with the subshaft of the bracket. When the stub shaft bracket is properly aligned, tighten the bottom bolt with the proper torque. Will recheck the backlash idle gear stub shaft, the camshaft sub shaft gauge of file 769. Figure 77. Check the dimensions between the number 2 idler gear stub shaft left bank camshaft stub, making sure both stub shafts are wiped clean. The gauge must indicate less than 5,000 of an inch. The number 2 idler gear in the left bank camshaft drive gear may be applied. Backlash reading being taken between the number 2 idler gear camshaft drive gear. If gauge is not available, see data services for limited. 11. If the dimension is not within the limits, gently tap the subshaft bracket until it is properly positioned. Do not tap the machine surfaces of the subshaft bracket. When subshaft bracket is properly positioned, tighten the top of the center mounting bolts with the proper torque. Recheck the backlash between the idler gear gauge and the crankshaft gear. If the backlash is not properly limited, the 3 vertical mounting bolts must be loosened. Step 7 through 12 repeated. 14. Remove the idler gear and apply with the remaining subshaft mounting bolts and washer. 1 3/8 inch 24 bolts are used to the edge of the subshaft bracket, directly below the lube oil manifold connection to the subshaft bracket. Show the file gauge number 769, idler gear subshaft bracket. Remove the 2 temporary locking pins and apply with the 2 mounting bolt washers for the tightening of all mountings to the proper torque. Remove the dowel holes for the 494,000 of an inch tapered reamer to 4,998 thousand of an inch to 10,000 of an inch bottom reaming while using cutting oil. If the dowel holes of the idler gear stub shaft bracket do not align with the holes on the crankcase drill of the ream and the oversize of the dowels is required to produce the full circumference fit. See parts in catalog listing the oversized dowel. Use the air hose to blow chip the air out of the dowel holes. Insert the 5/16 24 bolts approximately 1/2 inch for the dowel pins. Place the dowel and dowel holes in subshaft bracket with the drive and the crankcase end plate with the torque. The dowels over the 7 foot-pounds of torque, locking all mounting and end dowel pin bolts over the groups of 3 or less. Using the number 1 subshaft and number 2 subshaft, check the parallelism between number 1 and 2 subshaft. Figure 7-8. Take the 1 indicator reading of the gauge as close to the subshaft. Alright, figure bracket if possible with the other reading of this gauge near the end of the number 1 subshaft dowel indicator reading must be less than 4,000 inch. No parallelism must be checked applying with both idler gears. The gear and teeth mesh and taking backlash movement serve the data for the backlash limits. Figure 770 for checking the parallelism number 1 and number 2 subshaft. Alright, after doubling idler stub shaft bracket has been applied with the crankcase rear end sheet, all the bolts, torques, and assemblies should be checked for the gaps exceeding excess of 4,000 inch, which caused the critical loss of oil pressure to perform the check run of the 4,000 inch feeler gauge around peripheral area and periphery of the bracket and peripheral area of the bracket of the feeler gauge can be inserted, but the oil passage of the bracket must be removed with the cause eliminated. Recheck the dimensions between number 2 idler stub shaft and left bank camshaft stub shaft. Alright, your number 1 idler gear application, apply light coat lubricating oil. Number 1 idler gear stub shaft, place the idler gear on the stub shaft so 2 position marks are aligned and shown in figure 721. If the new gears are as used, refer to the exhaust valve timing end of the section with the information for the position of the marking of the gears. Timing procedure are not required within the camshaft and the crankshaft positions have not been disturbed. Install the number 1 idler gear thrust plate with the hardened washer bolts, tighten the bolts with the proper torque and the lock wire and pair using crisscross patterns. Use the feeler gauge to check with the number 1 idler gear thrust clearance and is within the limits specified in serve the data. Recheck the backlash between the crankshaft and the gear with the number 1 idler gear. Step 7 of the subshaft bracket application. Piston cooling flanges and lube oil manifold application. And flanges governing the piston cooling manifold opening to the crankcase end plate has not been removed. Install the flange gasket. Flanges 3/8 inch 24 bolts with figure 7 to 9 torque. The bolts to 27 foot-pounds of torque and lock wire. So you should have your lube oil manifold, lock wire, anchor bolts, piston cooling manifold flanges. This 7-9 shows lube oil manifold application. And assemble the end of the center of the oil manifold, ensuring sections being sure of the install of the gasket between. Then at 3/8 inch 24 bolt lock nuts, tightening with the 27 foot-pounds of torque. And install the previously assembled the manifold section of the sub shaft, left bank of the camshaft unit, oil line 7, figure 7 to 9. Be sure of the place the gasket under the manifold section 3/8 inch 224 bolts with 27 foot-pounds of torque and lock wire. If the subshaft left bank of the camshaft manifold does not even have the pipe plug, install the coat the threads with a high temperature thread compound, install the manifold, install the 2 1/2 20 inch bolts, figure 7 to 9, temp in the 16 pounds of torque. These bolts will be used with the anchor bolt or anchor for the lock wire and camshaft drive housing crankcase bolts. Camshaft drive housing application. The crankshaft drive housing seal strip for the person wipe free with the dust and dirt with apply with the coat of the gasket sealer to the camshaft drive housing. Apply with the gasket into the section with the camshaft drive housing, being sure that the gasket interlocks or joined properly. Apply with the camshaft driving housing crankcase to apply with the housing. Wipe the crankcase plate clean. Trim the rubber crankcase over the oil of the pane gasket, extending over the joint with the crankcase and plate. Apply with the Permatex to the joint area. Locate the camshaft drive housing in the proper position. Snug down the several of the bolts and holding it in place. 7 to 10 acting position points of the dial indicator indicates the camshaft driving housing alignment. Gauge figure 771 on left bank camshaft stub sheet. Sweep the left bank locating pin. Figure 710 camshaft drive housing is properly aligned at 8,000 to 10,000 inch reading. Is obtained in dial indicator. Alright, figure 710 shows the camshaft drive housing alignment. Repeat step 7 of the right bank camshaft stub shaft of the housing is not aligned properly. Place the wedge 772 between the camshaft stub shaft of the rack of the housing with the drive of the wedge and with the brass hammer. The dial indicator show the camshaft drive housing with the proper line. Torque with the mounting bolts through the proper torque line. Remove the wedge and recheck the alignment. Remove the two dial holes with the camshaft drive housing with it 494,000 of an inch tapered reamer at 4,998 thousandths of an inch plus or minus 2/10,000 of an inch between the bottom reamer. Being sure that be sure that you use cutting oil. If dial holes in the camshaft rising holding do not allow with the hole in crankcase, tremolo, and reamer, oversized dials is required to produce a full circumference fit. See parts of the catalog listing of the oversized dials. Use air hole blow chips out of the dial holes. Insert 5/16 of an inch, 24 bolts, approximately 1/2 inch in the dial pins. Place dial of the dial holes in the housing. Drive with the crankcase end plate with remove the dial bolts. Install the two remaining camshaft drive mounting bolts and the necks of the dial with the pins and torque with the specified torque. Lock wire with the camshaft drive housing upper bolts in the three groups, 3 each of the two remaining bolts of the bolts previously installed with the end plate for anchoring lock wire. Alright, install the remaining oil manifold section, being sure to apply with the proper gasket between the manifold crankcase between the manifold section previously installed with the one being applied with the using the lock nuts for the bolt connection with the two sections lock wire with the manifold crankcase bolts with the turbocharger filter is not installed with it this time. Temporary bolts and spacers should be applied with the filter mounting bolts. Install the oil slinger to crankshaft gear bolts prior to installation of the oil seal retainer. Measure the distance of the interface of the retaining mounting flange to the interface of the retaining tapered flange, figure 7.2. This measure the distance of the outer face of the camshaft driving housing with the face of the oil slinger of the crankshaft positioned toward the rear of the engine. The difference between the two measuring should equal the clearance specified in the surface data if required. Added to remove the oil slinger shims to obtain proper clearance. If the oil retainer has dowels, remove the dowels. Apply the oil retainer gasket. Oil retainer. Install the 4 equal spaced bolts and wash finger tighten it. Center the retainer tapping outside diameter of the soft face hammer until the radial clearance between the inside diameter and the gear sealing surface of the outside diameter is uniform around the circumferences measured using a feeler gauge. Refer to surface data with the proper radial clearance. Apply the remainder of 24 bolts and washers. Torque to 30 foot-pounds of torque. Remain the uniform clearance to ensure that the retainer has not shifted. Apply camshaft drive gears and spine swing drive gear assembly with the previously described. Alright, your auxiliary drive assembly. Description: auxiliary drive assembly figure 711, the mount of the turbocharger housing is driven from the right bank camshaft drive gear. And that shows the figure 711 shows the auxiliary drive gear. 1 would be your coupling flange, 2 dust shield, 3 cover, 4 oil slinger, 5 mounting pilot, 6 drive shaft gear, 7 supporting housing, 8 drain, 9 bushing. Alright, your maintenance. The new bearings are installed with a pressed into the support the housing line reamed and bored dimensions specified for the data. After mounting of the assembly with the turbocharger housing backlash between the gears must be checked and adjusted if necessary. Figure 712 show the dial checking the auxiliary drive gear backlash with the dial indicator and C clamp. Reverse the surface tab of the backlash limit limits backlash, adjusting loosening with the turbocharger mounting bolts. Reposition the turbocharger on the camshaft drive housing after the correct max shot backlash is the same. The turbocharger mounting bolts are tightened with the backlash check to see if it does not change camshaft assembly. Description: camshaft assembly figure 713 consists of flange segments of front rear subshaft space and is used on 12, 16, and 20 cylinder engines between the segments of each segment of the spans 12 cylinder, 4 and 5 for 20 cylinders. Segment marked with the shown figure 713 and the A with the correct assembly. Each of the cylinder are 2 exhaust cams, 1 injector arm. Each cylinder there are 2 exhaust cams, 1 injector cam, and 2 bearing journals. 2 bearing blocks at each cylinder equipped with a steel back leaded base babbitt and lined insert supporting the camshaft. Once again, they have 2 exhaust cams, 1 injector cam, 2 bearing journals, 2 bearing blocks at each cylinder, equipped with the steel back leaded base babbitt and line inserts supporting the camshaft. So camshaft 16 cylinder shows left bank subshaft long segment, AB, ABA, ABA, NO, and then maintenance. The camshaft may be removed without disturbing the subshaft. Remove the dowel pole to connecting the segment of the subshaft flange. Remove the oil lines, segment bearing blocks of the rock arms. Remove the rock arms. Remove the segment bearing block caps. Allows the camshaft removal. If the camshaft is removed for the reason other than the bearing replacement, an attempt should be made to retain the relative position of the bearing shells and the reinstallation of the camshaft. This may be accomplished immediately replacing caps of the camshaft removal. The entire block is removed, inserting block bolts of the wire-free ends of the bolt. This is possible to remove the segment of 16 and 20 cylinder camshaft without removing the entire camshaft. The entire camshaft must be removed on a 12-cylinder engine to change the segment. Inspection. After removal of the camshaft, the washer remove all the dirt with the oil passage. Visually inspect the subshaft of the segment, paying particular attention to the cam lobe of the journals, pitting and the chipping, the scoring, heat discolorization, journal cams, and light pit marks, minute flat spots, light score marks may be reused after blending and removal of the sharp edges by hand polishing. Check inside of the dowel holes for the bolts and burrs and remove the camshaft segments of the subshaft of the stow. Heat discolorization, magnaflux, and inspect with the hard tester. Discolorization, unfurnished portion of the camshaft should be discarded. As a result of the production process has been even seen in the new camshaft assembly. The assembly of the camshaft must be assembled as shown in figure 713. One dowel bolt in each segment flange is smaller than the other to ensure the correct angular position. After assembly of the camshaft of the subshaft, check for the concentricity between the subshaft of the camshaft journals. Maximum runout over the total length of the shaft. Support the camshaft with the precision rollers at number 2 and 7 on the 8 cylinder, 1, 6, and 7 and 12 on the 12 cylinder, 1, 7, and 10 and 16 on the 16, 1, 9, and 12 on the 20 cylinder camshaft bearing journals. See the service data limits for limits. Or your camshaft assembly installed with the engine must be conformed with the segment sequence and position indicated with the figure 713. On the right bank camshaft, the A marking each of the flanges front of the engine. On the left bank camshaft, the B marking on the flange must be toward the front of the engine. Subshaft connected with the segment of the flange A with the marking with a different configuration with the connected with the segment B with the marking with the check of the segment with the journal with the bearing and the clearance for the rest of the clearance for the rear subshaft. The limits are listed with the strip of the tab with the clearance measurement that can be obtained with the feeler gauges. Upper insulation replacement of the camshaft lubricating free of all of the moving parts with the placing the assembly in the proper line position. After replacing the block of the bar bearings, remove the rotate of the camshaft with the check with the binding after the flange dowel bolts with the reassemble the block arm with associated with the part with the check with the valve timing. At least one cylinder with the check with the segment position with the other adjusting with the exhaust valve setting with injector timing. Camshaft counterweight application. Counterweight replacement usually is not necessary. However, the counterweights are installed, but they should be applied with the position shown in figure 714. You have the directions, counterweight scribes, parallel entire engine cylinders, front camshaft weights, up or upon, plate straight, edge, top dead center, rotating camshaft. Camshaft counterweights are down. Position number 1, crankshaft. Camshaft counterweight timing. Exhaust valve timing. Alright, exhaust valve timing is important to ensure the correct relations with the valve operation to the other events in the cylinder power cycle. But directly adjusting the exhaust valve timing is necessary to know the top dead center of each cylinder is shown in table 1. Alright, your 8 cylinder would be, the firing order would be 0, 5, the firing order number 1, 5, 3, 7, 4, 8, 2, 6. And those angles are 0, 45, 90, 135, 180, 225, 370, and 270, and 315. Your 12 cylinder, your firing order is 112-7-4-3-2-9-5-2-11-8, and the firing top dead centers are 0, 19, 45, 94, 120, 139, 165, 214, 240, 259, 285. Your 16 cylinder firing order 189, 16, 3, 6, 11, 14, 4, 5, 12, 13, 2, 7, 10. 0, 22 and a half, 45, 67 and a half, 90, 1 and a half, 112 and a half, 135, 157, and 120th at 180, 202, 202 and a half, 225, 247, 270, 292, 315, 375, 337 and a half. All right, your 20 cylinder, your firing orders 119, 8, 11, 5, 18, 7, 15, 2, 17, 10, 12, 3, 20, and 6, and 13. 09, 36, 45, 72, 81, 108, 11, 117, 144, 153, 180, 189, 216, 225, 252, 261. Alright, items that govern the correct time, valve timing, and the given with the following principle or procedures. Maintenance, locating of the top dead center should become necessary to check the position of the flywheel pointer on the top dead center. Procedure as follows. Remove the airbox handle cover of the number 1 cylinder, and if necessary, bar the engine with the engine position number 1 piston below the center line ports. Insert brass stop bar, maximum 1.5 inch hexagonal square, preferred suitable length through the ports of number 1 cylinder so that the end of the bar brass is further port of the opposite side of the cylinder 715. Your 7-figure 715 stop bore insert through the cylinder ports a bar sufficient length to prevent the reapplication of the handhold cover while the bars are in place. Recommended a flange on the ends of the bar with the caution against the inverted rotation of the engine with the bar in place. 4. Manual bar with slowly in the normal direction rotation using pistons travel the stop of the bar against the upper surface of the cylinder ports. Figure 716. Alright, 716 show the position traveled by the stop bar, and then the caution used extreme to avoid excessive force. Make sure the position of flywheel pointer on the flywheel, figure 717. Limits of the piston travel on marked manual the bar engine slowly and the opposite of the direction normal rotation until the piston travel is again stopped by the bar. This against the upper surface of the cylinder port. Place the parts. Mark the second position of flywheel pointer on the flywheel, figure 7 and 18. Instant first and second mark. Shows the second limit of the piston travel on the mark on the flywheel. Alright, determine the number of degrees with the 2 marks on the flywheel. Divide the number by 2, figure 719 with the sample calculation. And then rotate the crankshaft in the normal direction. Rotate the rotation exact number of degrees determined by the stop 8 above. Move the brass stop bar from the engine. The pointer should now indicate 180 degrees bottom dead center. If it does not, position the pointer so that it does indicate 180 degrees. The pointer will now indicate the top dead center for the number 1 crank pin of the engine is rotated so the pointer is at 0 degrees. Alright, the checking exhaust valve timing. Check on the time and the place of the indicator of the rocker arm or adjusting screw that's shown in figure 720 of the valve into the rocker arm must be in the highest position so that the exhaust valve are closed with the press indicator down with approximately 100,000th of an inch. Set the dial 0 to turn crankshaft in the normal direction rotation until the flywheel is at 160 degrees at top dead center being checked. The timing corrector valve bridge will be removed in 14,000 inch. Timing must not be later than 110 degrees at the top dead center cylinder being 720. Timing exhaust valve timing is correct. Check for the proper installation camshaft gear train and correctly time excessive worn gears. Alright, the timing exhaust valve. The exhaust valve should be timed with the aim of the gear with the cam stub shaft. The camshaft of the gear is replaced. Exemption, the number 1 and the number 2 idler gear to do with this camshaft. Each of the bank must be timed to the crankshaft, but 1 cylinder each of the bank needs to be timed. Alright, to prevent possible valve damage, remove the loosening all rocker arms assembly except the 1 cylinder being removed. If the rocker arm assembly is removed, the hydraulic glass adjuster should be checked with the proper clearing of the valve stem. See section 5 for instructions. Apply dial indicator, rocker arm, and adjusting screw figure 720 is done. Everything checking exhaust valve time. Placing the dowels and bolts with the camshaft with the counterweight. Remove the counterweight with the gear. Camshaft can be rotated by placing the cycle of the variant wrench on the flange bolt nuts. Rotate the camshaft with the normal direction rotation valve bridge on which the dial indicator is resting and moves 14,000 of an inch. Turn the crankshaft with the normal direction rotation with the flywheel pointer to 105 degrees after the top dead center cylinder being checked with the install of the camshaft counterweight with the tub shaft to not tighten the bolts at this time. Use a flywheel at 105 at top dead center. Cylinder being checked at the dowel holes, camshaft, the driver, the counter beer with the camshaft, stub shaft, and maybe line approximately in line with each other, and turn with the camshaft at 104, 106 at another top dead center. The dowel holes can be lined up and then the bolts shall be tightened. The dowels don't line up with the tolerance. Remove the camshaft counterweight with the gear stub shaft. Rotate the gear 180 degrees. Place the stub shaft. Move the gear with the tooth. Replace the gear counter over the stub shaft with the dowels. Still do not line up the misalignment of less than 75 to 10,000 of an inch or holes must be retained insulation of 5,000 of an inch to 10,000 of an inch or 15,000 of an inch oversized dowels. Misalignment of dowel holes is greater than 75 to 10,000 of an inch. Proceed to step 17. Insert 5/16 of an inch 24 bolts approximately half inch in the dowel holes. Place the dowel holes and drive into the sub shaft. Remove the dowel bolts and from the pins. Remove the counterweight with the sub shaft. Install the dowel retainer plate with the counterweight with the sub shaft report. Torque bolt 90 foot-pounds. Install the dowel pin bolts and torque as 70 foot-pounds. Lock wire mounting bolts, dowel bolts in group of 3. 2 mounting bolts or 1 dowel bolt. The crankcase should now be rotated with a normal direction. Timing check with the valve bridge. With the valve being checked has been moved down to 14,000 inch. When the flywheel time pointer is at 104 and 106 at that azimuth top dead center. Repeat the operation one cylinder of the opposite bank after timing that has been completed with the relative position mating parts with identified with a similar method used with the new engines shown in figure 720 where the mating parts are marked with the number 1 piston of the top dead center with the completing of the valve timing procedure. Move the counterweight with the gear of the subshaft. Plug the dowel holes from the subshaft that follows. Drill and tap the 2 dowel holes at 30 quarters of an inch to 16 NF threads with a minor diameter of 7,031 thousandth of an inch over the 5,000 to 0,000 of an inch pit diameter, 7,944 thousandth of an inch to 16 10,000 of an inch. Countersink 1/16 of an inch gear on mounting side, drive thread, hex head bolts, plugs in the hole, surface tab with the plug part number to cut, plug head off the layer and peen out into countersink ground, plug flush with flange face check, check flange outside diameter, high spot 9 proper dimensions. If the camshaft relationship has been disturbed, repeat steps 3 and 19. Apply camshaft gear with the subshaft gear with the mounting bolts. 20 rotate engine crankshaft with the position in figure 724. Remove the gear mounting bolts with the position of the gear and the counterweight with the subshaft of the counterweight in the down position counter with the weight scribed in the line parallel with the engine center holes. Ensure the gear with the counterweight dowel pole holes are aligned. Install the mounting bolts with the secure with the gear with the counterweight with the subshaft drill and ream subshaft dowel holes and the 4,985,000 inch plus or minus 5,000 inch. Perform steps 8 through 16, and then it shows the big old picture of the camshaft gear train marking. In your service data, might as well do these. These are the right bank counterweight stub shafts, the camshaft gear meshing, left bank countershaft stub shaft, number 2 idler gear camshaft driver marking, and then number 1 idler gear, number 2 gear marking, number 1 idler gear marking, and then your camshaft gear crankshaft marking, and then shows the service data and the gear shaft auxiliary and drive shaft camshaft. I'll put up a download link. So if you want to check these out, you can check them out.